so much for joining us today. My name is Jessica Cork, and I'm Vice President of Community Engagement and Corporate Communications at YKK, and I am also the Vice Chair of the Japan America Society of Georgia. And today's event is organized by the Women's Series, which is a collaboration between the German, French, Belgian, Swedish, and Netherlands, American Chamber of Commerce, the British American Business Council, and the Japan America Society of Georgia. We host educational and networking events with the goal of bringing together women in the Atlanta international community, and we invite you to join us for our future events. So, of course, we know that diversity is good for business. McKinsey has reported that diverse companies are 33% more likely to have greater financial returns than their less diverse industry peers. And BCG found that companies with above average diversity at the management level generate 19% higher innovation revenues than companies with below average diversity. And it's great to hear in surveys such as PwC's annual corporate director survey, suggesting that most board directors are interested in diversity. And at the same time, several US states have begun implementing or contemplating legislation to mandate increased board diversity. And countries such as Norway, Spain, France, and Iceland have laws requiring that women comprise at least 40% of boards at publicly listed companies. However, unfortunately, the change does remain slow. In the United States, of the 3,000 largest publicly traded US companies, just 12.5% of board directors are from underrepresented ethnic and racial groups. Just 21% of directors are female, and only 4% are Black. So today we're really excited to welcome a fantastic group of panelists to discuss why board diversity is a business imperative and why diversifying boards is at the same time pretty slow. So before we begin, a couple of housekeeping notes. We do welcome questions from the audience, so please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please ask your questions. We'll have time at the end for that. Also, today's event is being recorded. We will send out a link after the event, and we do encourage you to share that with colleagues or friends, and so that they can join in this conversation as well. So before we get started, we would like to know a little bit about our audience. So I'm going to start a poll. And if you want to just take a second to answer that. So we will start the poll now. All right, and we will give you just a second. And I believe, let's see if I hit end polling, we should be able to see the results. Let me share the results there. Okay, so the questions that we asked you, if you're currently serving on a board, and we've got 60% are on a nonprofit board, 10% on a corporate board, we've got 20% of our audience on a leadership committee or advisory board, and 50% who are interested in serving on a board. So thank you very much for that. Okay, and then with that, what I would like to do now is ask for each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves. And I would like to start with our moderator, Norbert, and then if we could follow Norbert with Charmaine, and then Eduardo, and then Lisa. So turning it over to Norbert.
Yes, hi, good morning, everybody. So my name is Norbert Kuhls, and I'm a business journalist based in New York. I write for the German daily Börsenzeitung, which is a financial newspaper based in Frankfurt.
Hello, everyone. My name is Charmaine Ward-Milner, and I am the Director of Corporate Relations for Georgia Power. I lead a team across the state where we focus on the diverse customer communities, African American, Hispanic, Asian, LGBTQ, women, and senior. We have 3 goals: to educate on energy initiatives, to build advocacy and coalition around energy issues, and to enhance our brand. I'm glad to be here.
Good morning, everyone. And again, I want to thank the Coalition of Chambers for this very gracious invitation to be with everyone and added voice to this very important topic. My name is Eduardo Martinez. I retired in January from UPS, and my last role there was as president of the UPS Foundation. which is a global foundation that touches about 5,000 organizations worldwide across 173 countries. And I was also Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for a workforce that now stands at 540,000 worldwide. And it's a real pleasure to be here with all of you today.
Good morning, and thank you also to the Chambers and Societies. Glad to be with you all. My name is Lisa Robinson, and I am here representing OnBoard, the president of OnBoard here in Georgia. And our mission is, and has been for 29 years, advancing women in more leadership roles, executive leadership roles, and filling that pipeline, which placing more women on corporate boards, on for-profit boards. And that's in a nutshell what we do. And I'd love to tell you more as the morning progresses. But thank you for having me join you. Appreciate it.
Well, so great. So last year, when I was writing about the German company's response to the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, I was struck by the fact that diversity can actually mean different things in different countries. So I sensed that German companies with a global footprint, they figured that they were already quite diverse because they have lots of different nationalities working for them, and they employed a lot of women. And then there was this idea that treating people equally and fairly means not addressing cultural, ethnic, and racial differences. So in America, they had to learn, I found, that employees actually seem to embrace their identity, whether it's gender, ethnic, cultural background, race, or sexual orientation. So considering that we have a very international audience today, let's start the discussion by clarifying what diversity means in the context of a corporate or nonprofit board in the US. Do you have an ideal composition in mind, and how far away are we from that goal? Do you want to start, Lisa?
Thank you. I'd be delighted to. I think it has been advancing and morphing, and that's the good news, because even as Jessica was referencing, companies do better when they're led by more diverse boards. I mean, we all have to agree on that part because it's factual. And what the composition, it's really a matrix when you think about talent. And now a different diversity perspective is age. We're noticing a slight trend where it might be younger. So people might not be waiting always until they are retired to join a board, because a lot of boards might have an age out, that you might not be able to stay on at age 75. So yeah, it shortens your window there. But it really is everything in terms of diversity on the board. And one of the important pieces is not just to have representation of one. So in this case, we've been tracking women for years, and it's gotten so much better, especially on the corporate. And when I say corporate, the public boards, the private boards or directors are lagging a little bit behind, I would say. But when you think about that the women, you want more than one person. We call that the power of three, because how challenging is it to go in? Many of us can recall this, and you might be the only one, whatever that one is, the only one in the room. And it's harder to really, to have the same kind of consensus. And so that piece matters. And of course, just really briefly, the diversity of talents also matters, because that's what a board is made up. So you're going to want somebody who can chair the audit committee, but you also might want somebody, especially these days, for cybersecurity, different skill sets they're also looking for. I don't know if that answers.
Yeah, those are all great points, Lisa. And one of the things that I have always found fascinating as you look at what diversity means internationally versus the US is, different countries approach diversity differently. Mm-hmm. What I have found in certain Asian countries is that age is a big issue that's focused on. Or if you look at the continent of Africa, there's a lot of tribal diversity is an issue. So there are, broader palettes of diversity. around the world. And so you really, in order to run a sort of a global diversity and inclusion and equity program, you really almost have to do a country study of what's important to people of that country and that culture. I would add that, there's an interesting point regarding diversity of thought, right? So you want people that, will bring that diversity of thought, which is cross-cutting gender or sexual orientation or ethnicity.
Yeah, and Eduardo, you actually stole exactly what I was going to say, which was around diversity of thought.
I've known you too long, Charmaine. I've known you too long.
I know, but it's okay. And really, I just want to tag on to that, because you can have what looks like a diverse board, but if they all came from the same type of school, had the same experiences, all came from the Midwest, went to Ivy League, then you are going to have what they call groupthink. So even though the board looks diverse, what you're not going to get out of it, the impact and the productivity and the innovation that you're hoping for, because it is not diversity of thought. So I think that is really important. So when you look for diversity, you really have to do an assessment. I know we're going to get into that later. And that's something that I've done on every board I serve. A lot of times I serve in governance and compliance. And the first thing I do is an assessment of the board, both skills and kind of backgrounds, to really understand where the gaps are around what we're really looking for in terms of diversity.
So corporations though look at this in also in a number, in a sense of earnings and revenues. I mean, you've touched on this, but what are the kind of the key reasons a corporation then should have a diverse board in terms of bringing revenues up and things like that?
So I'll just jump in. I mean, I think there have been a lot of different schools of thought. There have been so many studies, how does it help you financially? I think at the end of the day, what it really helps is your overall culture. And when you have a good culture in a company and you have good morale, you have employees that want to stay and want to be engaged, you are automatically going to do better financially. So I really think it begins with the culture of the leaders of the board, and then seeing that permeate down to the leaders, management, and all the other employees. But I think it really helps, it improves the culture, which ultimately can affect the bottom line.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that there's a shift by CEOs in the US around being more than just about profits, right? So there's the Business Roundtable, which is a coalition of about 190 CEOs, and their mission up until a couple of years ago was that corporations exist for the benefit of the shareholder. Well, Jamie Dimon, who leads one of the biggest financial institutions in the world, is the chair of the BRT. And he voted to change that scope for companies to be more than just about the shareholder, but they exist for the benefit of their employees, their suppliers, their customers, and their community. And so that's a step in that direction where companies have to be a lot more than just chasing profits, Norbert.
And I would just add one thing, Norbert, and that is, in some states, they're compelled for the diversity piece. So in California, they've had legislature passed, and I'm not suggesting that, for example, we should do that in Georgia, because Georgia is very advanced in the composition on their boards. But I think you're right, Eduardo, even the New York Stock Exchange, they have their CEO council who's overseeing this. It certainly is a trend. I was saying about the Carlyle Group, who I spoke to last week, and they have shown that they perform better, 12% higher. But again, if you're looking at private companies, it's not always driven the same way as the public companies. So I think there is a little bit of difference. They're not answering to the shareholders the same, but they are seeing the change. And so I think that's moving as well. I think about 50% of the private companies right now have women on their board. So there's an enormous opportunity there, to use one example.
But what has driven that change, though, to more, so from a shareholder to more of a stakeholder idea? Was that the employees that were driving this? Was it investors? How did that change happen?
Well, I think there's been a shift in companies, CEOs understanding that they have to stand for more than just profits, right? That in the end, as Charmaine pointed out, if you're a purpose-driven company, and being diverse and inclusive is a big portion of being a purpose-driven company, you're going to be a more successful company. And that it's not just translated into profits, but it's translated in the environment, your community. And so the turnover of the results of being a more purpose-driven company is being a lot more about looking at the world holistically and not just from a sort of a tunnel vision aspect of profits. And it's that realization that has been prompted by the investor community. So you have ESG and you have a variety of different measures. It is driven by employees because CEOs now realize it. There's no better example than the CEOs here in Atlanta that, the outside world is coming inside your company, because employees and their families are impacted by the externalities. And so you just can't run your company in complete isolation. So it has been a combination of many factors that are driving. And I know that we'll get to this because I believe that we're just not moving fast enough. And so measures around accountability and measurement are all, at the end of the day, as well-intended as CEOs are today, particularly on this issue, on women on boards, we're just not moving fast enough. We're just not. Anyway.
Right. So I think it really is what Eduardo said. It's the trifecta. It's the employees, it's the investors, but it's also the customers. Companies are hearing it from all around that people want more diversity, right? So customers are saying, we want to buy products from companies who believe in the community, from companies who want diversity, from companies who think it's the right thing to do, who understand their corporate social responsibility. But then you have employees. Now we have employees that when they come to interview, they're asking, what is the diversity in the company? What is the diversity on the board? What do you give to from a foundation perspective or a community perspective? How do you think about corporate social responsibility? These are employees that we want to hire. They're interviewing us, right? And then you also, again, I think he talked about the ESG from the investor's perspective and having companies that are more purpose-driven, right? So I think it is that entire stakeholder group that is encouraging and I think going to be pushing harder and harder. And to Eduardo's point, quicker. I think they're saying, okay, y'all hear us, but you're not moving fast enough. We're not seeing the results. So,
well, Norbert, I would say some of that has to do with the process of how people get on boards, in all kinds of boards. And, used to be much more of the good old boy network. And even now, only about 25% of the board seats are filled via executive search. So how are they finding out about the candidates? It's very natural that it was homogenized because you're saying, oh, we share carpool with so-and-so and he'd make a great board member, or, so that's very natural. And that is what is changing, and maybe not as quickly as we would hope because, it's like moving a ship, turning a ship. But I think it is changing, that's for sure. So
the beginning of the change, though, the way I understand it, is the board, though, right? Because the board seems to be driving, the metrics for the CEOs, for the management board, for the executive committee. Is that correct? So
it is. A lot of times, there's the nominating piece of a board, but very often, And also think about a board when there are no term limits, because many boards don't have term limits. So someone could be on there and they have a lot of knowledge from having been, having served for years. But it's hard to immediately change. How do you quickly change over and make the percentage the difference? I mean, board members have to retire, or one alternative, expand the size of your board, and then you bring in a diverse board and change that ratio. But I think it can come from the general counsel, could be the one who's helping, figure out who's going to be on the board. Certainly the CEO, the board chair, the nominating, it can come from all areas. And again, depending whether it's a public board or a private board.
I think Lisa, raises a good point. When you look at the mechanics of what's happening and why the process, one of the reasons why I believe the process is slower is board turnover. You have all sorts of statistics that the average age on a board is over 61, and not that that's bad, but the board turnover is so small. Just looking at Fortune 500 companies, you may have 5,000 or 6,000 board members on those companies, and you may have a turnover of 400 or 500 seats a year in that group. And so that is an amazingly small group in which to, be able to bring up a diverse palette of board members. So I think board turnover has got to be addressed by companies, and sort of term limits, and some companies have it, but that's a new mechanism that needs to be more embraced by companies at large.
Right. And I want to say that's been a big problem with some nonprofit boards as well. The same thing, same people have been on there for 10, 15 years, and they see that the nonprofit organization isn't really moving forward or being as innovative as they could be, but it's because they're not getting any infusion of new people or new thoughts. So one of the things that I've seen, especially on some of the national nonprofit boards, is instituting term limits, number one, or number two, increasing the size of the board, making it a little bit bigger. Or the third thing is going to kind of an advisory status. So are there some people that have been on the board for quite a long time? You can still be on the board in name, but you go to a different status level. And whether it's called advisory or council, or you can pick a name, but that's also allowed those organizations to free up some seats and be able to get some new board members. So those are three critical things I think have to happen, regardless of whether it's nonprofit or private or corporate.
Eduardo mentioned purpose. So diversity and inclusion is not just a governance issue, obviously, but a cultural and societal issue as well. So do you sense that corporations and the boards also are leading a way to more systemic change in overall society? In the sense that they companies make statements that come out, almost make political statements, or
well, I mean, I think that goes along, with the fact that CEOs are becoming more activist, because they realize that they just can't bury their head in the sand anymore, right? Their employees are bringing these issues into the company and saying, what do we stand for? Are we going to stand by and watch, civil rights be deteriorated? And CEOs, the enlightened CEOs, are realizing that, it's all interconnected, and purpose and creating value across the entire value chain, customers, employees, suppliers, communities. They get that. And that's why, you're seeing CEOs become more activist. I will tell you, I spent 45 years at UPS, and we were a private company for over 90 years before we became a public company in 1999. It was 1907 when we were started. And I saw the transformation at UPS where we now are very active. And so I have seen it in a place that was a private company and became a public company and a global company and really puts a stake in the ground on issues all over the world now. And I think CEOs see that that's the way forward.
Right. And I think that we have seen this more now than ever. When we think about the social injustice incidences that we have seen all over the TV, and we have seen CEOs come out and make very public, very emotional and passionate comments about what is going on and how their company does not support it or will not tolerate it. We've seen tremendous dollar investments by companies across the globe. And I've really been proud of the companies in Georgia that we've seen the CEOs come out, including my own Southern Company and Georgia Power, Tom Fanning and Chris Womack, make substantial investments, and as well as others, UPS, Home Depot, Coca-Cola, that we have seen them publicly come out. And it has been, I think, just really heartwarming to see the CEOs, to your point, Ed, take kind of an activist role, because the employees are watching, the suppliers are watching, right? The customers are watching. And we have seen CEOs really step out there. Now, is it as much as everybody wants? Probably not. But is it certainly a change from the past? Absolutely. And a change in the right direction.
I have to give a shout out that Southern Company is supporting our racial equity program at Onboard. I just want to say that, Charmaine, to thank you to Southern Company. They put their money where their mouth is. Yeah.
Thank you.
So my sense though is but a bigger diversity on boards is driving that, is it? Would you subscribe to this idea?
I'd say that's just one component.
Okay.
You know, I think that boards should lead the way on those issues. But when you look at and this is different in different companies, you know, generally the board of directors runs oversight, very high level strategy and things like that. It's really the C-suite, the management team at the company that runs the day-to-day, that really sets the tone from the CEO. And yes, the CEO should get that strategic direction from the board. But you know, in most companies, it's really the people running the day-to-day company that sets the tone, I think, on inclusion and diversity for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
Norbert, could I jump in and address one of the questions I saw in there? And it's it can be the elephant in the room from my perspective. And that is somebody's thought that we're checking a box. So the reason why I want to address, I'm also a partner in executive search. So I go through a lot of, you know, what the companies, what the clients might be looking for. And it really, it's not about checking the box. It is for that diversity of thought. And it's let's first acknowledge, and I'll just use women for this example. There are plenty of women who are equal, if not could be a better board member serving on a corporate board. And it all has to do with your perspective. And exactly what Charmaine mentioned, you know, you don't want a homogenized board where they all came from the same schools or whatever it might be. You want this different thought. And the age piece is very important, because you think about what we know. I mean, Eduardo, you and I probably, our children know technology perhaps differently than we do, or somebody knows, you know, the cybersecurity and what just happened with Colonial. I mean, those kinds of things. That's why you want the diversity of age also on the board, and because people think of different things, different perspective. And that's the biggest value, I think, that they bring of having a diverse board. And I really push back on it's checking the box. I think it's the people are out there. It's how you go about finding them and being inclusive in that way. Because Charmaine, I don't know, did you think about being on a corporate board growing up? Maybe not. Some of it is that we're out there. Let's let people know these are the opportunities in front of you. And that's a part of it, looking to the generations to come and saying, yeah, you could be a part of this.
So what is the effect of the diversity debate in corporate America on the international community? I mean, there's a lot of international companies in Georgia, obviously, in the US, companies like UPS are global. I mean, do you think, I mean, is this driving it maybe a little bit, the US debate?
And Marta, you'd be better,
Yeah.
but I'll just quickly say, I have not found that to be the case when I think of companies here who are in India or, you know, where their main base is. I just haven't seen the same diversity, but Eduardo, you'd have a better.
Well, but I think from an aspect of pushing the envelope, I think what we're doing here in the US is impacting companies. Again, it's all a question of velocity. They're just not moving fast enough. What I have found is interesting that some country governments are moving faster than the corporate community. You know, I was just thinking about Rwanda, and you know, in some of my meetings with government officials, most of them were women, and they were very proud to say that President Kagame, in his charter for his cabinet, says that he has to have 50% women. And you know, this conversation I had 5 years ago, but it always stayed with me that even in developing economies, developing governments, that there is this recognition of the power of women. And so, you know, just reflecting as you were asking the question, Norbert, I mean, I do think that what's happening here is pushing internationally based companies not moving fast enough, and I do believe that in some cases women are attaining higher positions. If you look at who's running the WTO, you know, governments, I think women are really rising higher in governments internationally than they are in corporations. But, you know, it is a big population of companies.
Let's move on to the individual perspective. So how, because there were a lot of people that would like to be on the board from the poll. How do you get on a corporate or non-profit board as a diverse candidate? How do you position yourself?
Well, I can talk about it from the nonprofit board perspective. I mean, I've done a lot of that, help people to get on boards. I've been chair of boards. I probably serve on 5 or 6 nonprofit boards right now, both national and state boards. So I think it's a couple of things from a nonprofit perspective. First, there are a couple of great programs. I love United Way VIP. That is a program that you can join, and it actually teaches you all about what does it mean to be on a board, what are your roles and responsibilities. A lot of times people think they want to be on boards until they realize, you know, what some of the roles and responsibility. It is work. You have to fundraise, you have to raise money, you know, you have to serve on committees. I mean, some people say it's at least, you know, 10 to 20 hours, usually about 10 hours a week if you really are engaged on that board. So I think number one is looking at programs where you can learn how to be a good board member. And I think the second thing is identifying the things that you're interested in. What are you passionate about? Is it youth? Is it education? Is it the arts? And then looking for those organizations and looking to see who is on those boards. Is it anybody that you know? Can you get an introduction? Can you begin volunteering? Most of the boards that I'm on, I honestly started out many, many years ago as a volunteer. And then I moved up, and as I got more responsibility corporately, I was able to get higher responsibilities on the boards. But I think those are all some things you can think about, is looking for how to really understand what it means to be on a board, understanding what your interests and passions are, and identifying those nonprofit organizations, and then going to volunteer to see if it's something you really want to be engaged with. Because remember, there are 3 things around, you know, when you are a board member, and a lot of people know this, is duty of care, is duty of loyalty, and duty of obedience. And so duty of loyalty is you put the organization first, duty of care is that you're good stewards of any of the resources, and duty of obedience is you're making sure they're being compliant. So when you're a board member, you really have a big responsibility to that organization. So you need to think very hard about taking that step.
Add one piece on the nonprofit side, only because Eduardo and Charmaine know I've been an asker because I've asked them before. But part of being a board member on the nonprofit, you have a financial, you will be asked to contribute. And I'm guessing, depending on the size of the organization, could be $500 to $10,000, depending on what kind of company it is, just as your annual gift. And perhaps your company will help fund that, or your match would help fund it, but that's something to go in kind of with open eyes about. I think for getting on a for-profit board, there are all kinds of levels for that too. And I think the nonprofit as a start is an excellent way early on. I really do. But it's about preparing yourself, asking if you have the real time to be on a corporate board. I mean, how many, maybe hundreds, thousands of pages you have to read before your quarterly board meeting that people might not realize. So how much time, and if you're employed at the moment, does your employer, are they supportive of that? Because it is going to take time away from what you're doing. You could go on an advisory board first before you're on the full-on corporate. You know, you might be getting a small stipend for going on there, but that adds to your own board bio that you served in that capacity. And then I think really working on your network and letting people know you need a board bio, you need to have your elevator speech about what you're bringing to a board, and you need to build that network with the people who are most influential. So going through that, that's a lot of what we help people do it on board. And so happy to talk about that offline if anyone needs any help.
So Eduardo, I mean, is there a big demand though for diverse candidates for boards right now?
Yes, I mean, I think that is a priority for companies, but here again, you have just very small opportunities. But I think that with the events of the day, and by the way, the racial reckoning that the country and in fact the world has endured, throughout the year and a half. I mean, this focus on diversity and inclusion really started, I would say probably 7 or 8 years ago in earnest, with some of the reports that were published that Jessica mentioned, the McKinsey report that was published in about 2013, 2014 regarding the business case for diversity. But I think that the issues of the day have made it so much more pertinent to the CEOs, to boards. So there has been more emphasis, but again, the pace is just too slow. I mean, moving, the percentage of women on board, 1 or 2% per year for the last 4 or 5 years, to me is just too slow. Having 5% Black women on board is ridiculous, right? When they represent 18% of the population. So yes, that's at the top of the list, and I have this conversation at least 2 or 3 times a week with companies regarding focusing on diversity, focusing on women, but the numbers just don't add up. So I mean, that's my perspective on it.
Norbert, on a positive side, I would say, at least in Georgia in particular, it's really changed. So we went from, in 2011, there were only 3 companies who had 3 or more women on their board. And now I think there are close to 30 companies in Georgia with 3 or more women. And that really makes a difference, the board seats. I agree about the women of color, but there are changes happening there, and people are asking very specifically. So one thing I do at Onboard is we send out to all of our membership board opportunities, being part of a consortium around the country. So sending those, I see them, then I'm presenting people, and it does get very specific about what people are looking for in their board seats. I mean, very specific. But they are asking, they're coming to us because they want to put a woman on their board, and oftentimes a woman of color, but it can be, around the country. So we're sending those out multiple times a month, these opportunities. Now, they're not always for public companies. Again, it could be private, it could be startups. Those are opportunities we should still look to, because maybe you're not making $250,000 a year to be on that startup, but it could be equity that could be very valuable later on, and certainly learn a lot by being on those kinds of boards.
Right, and position you for other boards, right? So
Yeah.
I always tell people that, but I want to talk about nonprofit boards and kind of a different kind of diversity. I sit on so many boards where we are absolutely looking for board members. I mean, in the nonprofit world, if you want to get opportunities, experience, there are so many nonprofit organizations that are looking for board members. And it's sometimes the reverse of diversity, right? So I sit on, let's say, an African-American arts organization. We want white board members. We want Hispanic board members. We want, LGBTQ board members. So there are so many African-American nonprofit organizations that are desperately trying to diversify their boards. So if you are thinking about a nonprofit board and you have a passion again around something, look at some of the African-American boards. And then you also have the same thing on some of the boards where I said where it's mostly white. They're looking to have younger people or African-American, Hispanic, LGBTQ. There is a lot of opportunity to get experience on boards as it relates to nonprofits.
So what are the challenges, once diverse candidates are on boards, what are the challenges for them? I mean, Lisa, I think you mentioned the rule of three, but.
Yeah. So, I'll just jump in. I was going to say this earlier. It's about culture. I mean, you can have one Black person or one female, but if the culture of the board is not that all voices are heard, it doesn't matter, right? I mean, if I keep saying something, but nobody hears me, and then one of the white guys say something, everybody's like, oh, that was a great idea. Pretty soon, I'm going to stop engaging, and I'm probably just going to ultimately get off the board. And I've had a bad experience, and the board did not gain the experience of my diversity, because the culture of that board was not inviting, it was not engaging, and they didn't allow all voices to be heard. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges, and it goes back to Lisa's rule of three.
One quick thing on that, Norbert, is, and again, I'm just using women as the example, is that we need to help one another. So if Jessica gets on a board and she's the only woman on their board, or only maybe whatever it is, she needs to be proactive and introducing them to other women who would be good board members, or other people who are representing the international culture, or whatever it might be. So I think we can really help one another in that, so that it's not just automatically going back to kind of business as usual.
In terms of public stances that corporations take, or boards take, CEOs take, the US is also in the midst of a little bit of a, it's not a little bit, it's a culture war, right? So is there a sense of, is there pushback against these diversity initiatives that you sense?
Norbert, was that a question to me?
Yeah, in general.
Well, I think, one of the most effective assets and resources that UPS has is our employee networks, and our BRG, we call them business resource groups. I mean, this is a wonderful group. We have over 220 around the world, and across sexual orientation, race, ethnicity. You know, we have working parents, BRGs, we have LGBTQ. I mean, we have 9 different cultural and racial employee groups. And I think that the strength of UPS really has always been at the heart of our people. And they are our eyes and ears around our communities, and they advise the management team on really how to really be an effective corporate citizen. And so if anything, that dynamic with our employees and our business resource groups has just lifted our company in very challenging times. Not only the racial reckoning, but the pandemic and all the challenges that have sort of siphoned off from those tragedies. Our employees and their outreach to communities, bringing in the emotions into the company and allowing us to really lean on each other has been, I think, one of the most beautiful things that I've seen my company really process in all the time that I've been there, because it's just been a challenge outside and inside the company, and it's all becoming one collective effort on behalf of the employees with the company.
Okay, but there's some. I think it was a couple months ago that it was difficult for companies to get contracts, federal contracts, if they had diversity initiatives and all of stuff. You know, federal contracts, but there was a different administration. So anyway, we have a little bit of time left for audience Q&A. I've got a couple of, so the audience, please use the Q&A button and send questions in. I'm gonna start with one from Anthony Tompras. He says, that that the resounding message that comes through right now seems to be that to make people comfortable in their role as a director, people supposedly don't want to be the only one in their demographic. And then he goes on and says, that strikes me as going against diversity if you're going to build a comfort zone before people can do their job effectively. Shouldn't companies be hiring the best qualified person for a job instead of just checking a box?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna give it to the panels. Do you sense that there's with these diversity initiatives that people still are checking a box, and they might not be hiring the best qualified person?
Again, I'm going to circle back to, that's a little bit of what I wanted to address before, but I would say from the perspective of also doing executive search, because we have very candid discussions with clients about what they want. And our perspective is always to present the best slate, and a goal is to have a diverse slate, but the diversity can reference all kinds of things, background or education, or there are so many different things that can have meaning to that and help. And helps in the comparison and for the client to figure out exactly who they might be looking for. I'll tell you something that is interesting. I think we did something last year about hiring without bias. And that's something that I think companies might want to think about. It could be that way for board selection as well, but it's about, without knowing it, really, we might do or say things or present the company or all kinds of things that actually really are biased, and you may not be getting the most diverse slate of great candidates. And I'll use one, thinking about age. When you put that you want, say, 7 years of experience, and then you get someone who might come in who's, I don't know, 55, 60 years old, who could absolutely do the job. But then they say, oh no, sorry, we only are looking for 7 years of experience. I mean, how you're writing up what it is that you're looking for can be very exclusive. And people don't realize that. You know, somebody, they might look at, let's say someone's moved around a lot, you know, and certainly people on this call might think about that if they've moved around quite a bit for reasons. It could be your spouse or your partner might be in the military, so you've moved, and they're thinking, without ever digging in, oh, this person just hops from job to job. But things that kind of get in our heads that are influencing what we're thinking about prematurely, I would say.
I do think that companies are trying to get away from just checking the box, but I think, like Lisa said, there is a lot of unintentional bias. And I know one thing that many companies are starting to do, this really is more about employees versus necessarily boards, but that is, you know, kind of taking resumes, taking the name off the resume, anything on the resume that might give you an idea of their age, or that they went to a HBCU, which is historically Black college university, anything that would tell you their race, gender, age, they're taking that off the resume. And that is something that we are piloting right now at Georgia Power, is looking at the opportunity to be able, you know, to do that, to take away any unintentional biases as we hire people. And other companies are piloting this same type of initiative. And I think this same thing could be used, you know, maybe for a nonprofit board or a for-profit, you might could use something similar. But I think people are trying hard to get away from just checking the box. And they do want to make sure that they get the best candidate. But really, getting a diverse candidate means casting a wider net. And that's where I find many of the organizations, they aren't able to cast the widest net. And Lisa said, what used to happen is you just said, oh, I know this is my neighbor or my golf buddy. I mean, but how you cast a wider net for these companies that are looking for people to be on the for-profit or even the nonprofit boards. On the nonprofit boards, it's a little easier. I'm on the national nonprofit board, and we started doing willingness to serve, and we send it out to our entire membership that we are looking for board members for this national board. Now you would think, oh my goodness, we must get 100, responses. We don't. We still don't. Even doing a willingness to serve to over 10,000 members, we might get 20 responses. And of those, 5 might actually meet the criteria. But what we do know is we cast a wide net and we tried our best to get diverse candidates. And that's what we really want to see companies do and organizations do, is at least try, right? Cast the widest net and then make sure you're not checking the box. You're getting the best candidate, whether they're diverse or not.
One thing just to remember on those for-profit boards is that they're small groups for the most part. And those people work together potentially for years. You could end up traveling together. You do things with your spouses. And so one of the criteria actually when they are and through the interview process is making sure they're going to work closely together. That you're not going to have someone next to you who's kind of bugging you, or you can't get to consensus, or, those kinds of things. And then conversely, when you think about hiring in companies now, and one thing we used to say is, oh, are they going to be a good cultural fit? Mm-hmm. Really? We got to drop that now. Because what does that mean? That means I want you to come in, be like me. Oh, we're going to get along. We're going to go to the same lunch place, whatever it is. And so we try now and avoid that part. So thought it might be a little different for the board work, I guess.
I wanted to chime in on what you were saying, Charmaine. So from a diverse candidate pool, do you think that it's not necessarily someone in an executive level position? It could just be a manager or director, as long as they're qualified in terms of experience?
In terms of recruiting for an employee or a nonprofit board?
Nonprofit, yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I know that that's been another thing. I will tell you, when I first moved to Atlanta, I lived in Florida before and I served on nonprofit boards. And when I first moved to Atlanta many, many years ago, and I was like, oh, well, I want to be engaged. I want to serve on boards. And they were like, well, are you a vice president? Are you an SVP? Are you an EVP? And I was like, no. I mean, it was clear. So I had to start all over in Atlanta, volunteer. But, you know, I learned a lot. Volunteering and then being on steering committees and being on advisory committees and getting to, you know, kind of serving on nonprofit boards. So I think that is being looked at differently now, and people are allowing individuals who may not have that high, you know, be in that C-suite, but bring great value to a nonprofit board. And we're seeing more of that. And again, that's given us the diversity that we're looking for. One of the things I'm so excited about is this year, I was selected to be on the board of trustees for Clark Atlanta University, which is also my alma mater. And thank you. And so I know that that was one of those things. I mean, you know, colleges, universities, they want people in the C-suite. Well, I've been in this community and I've done work for years and years and years. I'm not in the C-suite yet, but I bring tremendous value. And so I was really excited that they saw that. And we're seeing more of that across the board for large nonprofit organizations, seeing people who bring value in different ways, even if they don't have a title.
So I have another audience question. Matthew Wagner asked that there's a subset of nonprofits, faith-based or institutions, and that they exert significant influence on the hearts and minds of business leaders. So he wants to know whether you know of any examples of faith-based institutions that are doing it right in terms of diversity, and what role could such institutions play in moving diversity and inclusion forward in society?
I think Eduardo knows, because we had children together at Marist School, and I, you know, worked there for 8 years. That's a Catholic independent, the Marist, and I'm also on the St. Vincent de Paul board right now and chair the nominating. And so I can't speak of all, you know, kinds of, but in my limited, and Eduardo, maybe you were on the Catholic Foundation here, I can't remember, but I think they place a lot of emphasis actually on the diversity. When you think about, and I imagine this is true with other faiths, but thinking about the constituents, the people that we serve, St. Vincent de Paul serves all people here, particularly, you know, say the homeless, et cetera. It's not just Catholics. And so the board is comprised of a very diverse group of all kinds of diversity again. So I think it is intentional. I think it's making its way, same to nonprofits. I've been on nonprofit boards for many, many years, I'll just say, and that has always been a topic, to make sure that there's diversity on there. So I don't think that piece is new, really.
All right. Well, we're almost out of time. Thank you, panelists, for your insights. I thought it was an interesting discussion. I learned a lot, and I hope the audience learned something too. So I'll hand it over to Thais.
Yes, thank you, Norbert. And on behalf of the Women's Series organizations, I'd like to thank you all, Norbert, Eduardo, Charmaine, and Lisa, for sharing your insights today. I'm sure we could spend a whole day on this, right? But yes, thank you to those who joined us live today and participated in this discussion. And we hope you continue to stay safe and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.